Good afternoon. Let's get this show on the road. I'm Ron Newland, your instructor for today's Bloomerang Academy class on donor cultivation, a special adapted COVID-19 edition. A little bit more about that in a minute. This is me. I'm your instructor. A database consultant is my title. I've been with Bloomerang for 6 years, and I was a fundraising consultant and executive director and development director for several years before that. So if you're watching this later, you're not with us live today, and you're watching it on YouTube in the future, do jot down my email address, or even if you just want to, even if you're live today, I'll be happy to email you the expanded version of my notes. You'll see as we go through. Some of the reports we're going to be building today are kind of extensive. So today's class is actually, it was a new class this time last year. Donor cultivation was a class that we developed in response to requests from a lot of our users to do something that fell between our longstanding list segmentation class that talks about how to set up for your year-end appeal and make sure your first-time donors get a different letter from your repeat donors and things like that on the one end, and then at the other end we've got major classes on major gifts, and a request to come up with something in the sort of mid-range to help you identify and come up with strategies for getting those people whose first gift is $100 to figure out which of them may be capable of something significantly more than that, and how to communicate with them and sort of work them up the ladder prior to the point where you would meet with them on a regular basis as a major gift prospect where you're talking about 4, 5, 6-figure gifts. This month, we decided to rework this class a little bit and tweak our suggestions for what may be your current reality. Most of us have been had about 2 months now into some kind of lockdown. Most of us working remotely, almost certainly having had to cancel some in-person fundraising opportunities. We at Bloomerang, we're now 8 weeks into working remotely. And I've just been amazed and gratified at how busy you've kept us. I have to admit, I was worried that some people might just hunker down, pull the blankets over their head. But no, actually, almost all of our customers are just actually doubling down on their efforts to communicate with their donors in other ways, now that face-to-face isn't an option. So congratulations and bless you. Now, in fact, some of you probably experienced last week some of the lag and downtime issues that we had here at Bloomerang last Tuesday and Wednesday, which were created by the overwhelming number of outgoing emails and incoming donations caused by Giving Tuesday Now. Sometimes, what happens, in Bloomerang is when the traffic, begins to spike. Sometimes things get slow. Some folks are going to hit send, and create this huge backlog. And I think that's kind of outgoing emails. And at any rate, we didn't want to cut everybody off by rebooting. So we turned off all of the other functionalities so everything in the Bloomerang had could focus on keeping your online giving forms running and your outgoing emails, including acknowledgement emails, running. I know that caused problems for many of you. We apologize again. Over the weekend, we upgraded significantly the number and size of our servers. Hopefully, that was a lesson learned. So, agenda for today. First, we're going to take a look at some of the new resources that Bloomerang has added in the last 2 months for dealing with, COVID-19. We're going to run 3 reports for just looking at your recent donations, looking at your new first-time donors, and looking at repeat donors who with their last gift are now recent upgrades. 2 different audiences there. To each of these reports, we're going to add a column. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes talking about the the generosity score that is available on for every one of you, whether you are subscribing to the full set of information that Donorsearch makes available on people's giving capacity and their giving histories other places. You still have access to some of it, and we're going to spend just a couple minutes on that today. Then the generosity score updated in Donorsearch. I'm not even sure. I'm actually going to have to look. I'm going to have to look the answer up for for that, Emmanuel, and get to you later. So step 4 in our agenda today, we're going to talk about, once we've identified some first-time donors, we talk all the time in Bloomerang about how important it is to get that second gift. We're going to look at a series of tools and recommendations that we have for you, how to filter for a separate acknowledgement letter, the new Donorsearch, first-time donor call feature that now shows up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. The email survey tool that we launched about this time last year, the concept and how to set the filters to create a welcome packet, maybe once a month for new donors from the last month, and then making sure that those donors are obviously getting their regularly scheduled quarterly communications. And the best practices that research is starting to indicate to us now is that if you're doing 3 or 4 of the other things on this list, that might be a good idea. 4 months might be a good time to ask for a second gift. Don't wait a year. So, and then step 5, we're going to take a look at that third report that we ran earlier in the session, making sure that the generosity index is on this list of repeat donors who are upgrades. Quickly discuss some things. They're not necessarily Bloomerang strategies. They're just some good advice for things that back when we can get back to face-to-face fundraising, some good advice for some things to do en masse with some of these folks. And then finally, I want to talk about, I'm going to demonstrate an idea for a solicitation that you might want to do by early to mid-June, particularly, almost certainly, if you're at the end of a fiscal year, a kind of a clever little way to look at some people that might be, the opportunity to make one more gift at the end of the fiscal year to up their cumulative total and appear in a different giving circle in your annual report. So we'll go through that. I'll try to answer some questions at the end. I'll email the people that we can't get to, and then I will dismiss everybody by saying, go have fun storming the castle. And with that, let's get into Bloomerang. Well, not in my database, but simply in the public Bloomerang website that anybody can visit, whether you have a Bloomerang subscription or not. So if you've got other organizations that you advise or volunteer with, make sure that even if they're not Bloomerang customers, they know about this. On the basic Bloomerang screen that for our basic public website, we've got the freebies. And we've added here, in addition to where you would go to sign up for the Academy or download our templates or look at some of the other things that we offer, we have added a whole set of COVID-19 resources. These are available to anybody. It includes a couple of lists of funding sources specific to emergency applications for organizations that are being severely hurt by by the lockdown. We have all kinds of links to relative legislation, how to apply for the the CARES grants and loans. There's hot links to various articles about that process. We got some really nice success stories. These are short little videos that we've created with, looks like about 8 of our customers who in the first month after the lockdown began, started doing some really progressive things and have some really good stories to tell. At least, if nothing else, to just kind of demonstrate that good things are happening and can happen. And then, various other curated lists and templates, downloadable templates for a script for a thank you call, a event toolkit. People are starting to do online events, and then a variety of other just webinars and podcasts that you can link to. The other thing I want to show you, in addition to all these freebies out there in the public, is if we do log in to your Bloomerang database, as I'm logging in now to my sample database, under emails, we've added a whole new batch of email templates. So you go to emails, go to email templates, go to new, and in addition to the existing starter templates that we provide, we have a series of COVID-19 templates for thank yous for Giving Tuesday donors, what we'll be talking about here in a minute. Save the date emails. Just sort of basic information about just a template with some language in here for letting your constituents know how you're dealing, how you are still providing your services at this time. So just feel free to take a look at these. If one of them is useful, you might find the artwork is all you need. You just want to change the language in it and make it unique to your own organization. And whole paragraphs may be perfect the way they are. Check with the executive director. Postpone event information. Just some things to click. Hopefully, a couple of these might save you some time rather than creating them from scratch. Okay, so let's next talk about using reports. I think what we want to focus on today is the idea that a lot of you may have, hopefully, been pleased to get more gifts than you might have normally expected in the last 2 months. Some of them may be just generous people finding you on their website. Maybe you participated in Giving Tuesday and had some good results. Maybe you've done a specific direct mail and or email appeal earlier than last week's Giving Tuesday event. So I think maybe the first thing I'd want to do would be to create a report just to look at your donations from the last 60 days. Now, I would build a report from scratch, a list of transactions here, because we're just trying to get a sense of how many transactions have you seen in the last let's just say 60 days. So a transaction report with no filters is going to give you a reverse chronological list of every donation in your database, every transaction, including pledges and pledge payments and things like that. But what we want to see here is we're going to filter these only for the date is, and then you can put a date range, or you can say, in this case, let's just say during the previous 60 days. This is when things started changing. So I had 55 transactions in my database. Of course, these are all imaginary donations from imaginary people, but the report's going to show, well, most of them are imaginary. The report's going to show columns for fund, campaign, and if you had special appeals if you use appeals, you can see most of my donations that came in last week were, I had an appeal for Giving Tuesday Now 2020. So at this point, we're just trying to get a sense of how many different, you might want to, in fact, group these by appeal, rather than how, first of all, we're looking at a total of 55 transactions totaling $5,700. So nothing really, really huge in here. But maybe what you'd want to do is go to your appeal column, click it, and use group by this column. And when you do that, now instead of a chronological list, I've got a list of my 10 gifts that came in the last 60 days that did not get coded with an appeal. But I had 4 personal solicitations. I did a COVID-19 mailing back in early April, that got 25 results. And I had a Giving Tuesday Now effort last week that got 8 results. And I've got some gifts that came in, my recurring donation payments from my monthly donors. And so what I'm doing, so first of all, you get a sense of the total number of donations that you're dealing with in this time. Is it, and are there some things here that that are kind of standing out in your mind as something that I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. That seems like more than we raised with our standard spring appeal last year. All right, question from Jennifer. If the donation is based on an email, does that tie back to that letter email as reflected in that far right column? If the donation is, if you send out an email and the email has a link that sends you to, that sends the recipient to your website, your online giving form is going to have or can have an appeal attached to it. So yeah, hopefully what we've done here, if you did a mass email campaign last week, or if you're still working on one for the next week, make sure that you're online, make sure that you create an appeal for that effort by going to settings. In fact, I'm done here, so I can go ahead and go to settings, appeals. So if you had not yet done a COVID-19 emailing or campaign, go ahead and create one. Now then you can go to your online giving form, and the day before you send out your send your effort, go to website integration, go to your online giving form, and open up your online giving form, and you can here add that appeal. And for the next week or so after you've launched this effort, then that appeal is automatically going to be added to each incoming gift, and that report that we just ran will in fact show. Now, if you're if you're doing a mailing and people are writing back in, you're going to have to remember to manually add that appeal as you're doing your gift entry, as you're as you're totaling up your checks. So the next thing I want to do is let's take a look. And now, instead of running a report that's a list of transactions, I want a list of constituents. I want to see who are my first-time donors out of this list. I got 55 gifts in the last 60 days. So I'm going to create a new report, this time from scratch, and I'm going to this time I want to see a list of, not transactions, but a list of constituents. But the filter I'm going to use, and in fact, I don't necessarily, I not only want to just see the names of people, you'll also see, if we look down here, I've got Gomez and Morticia Adams household, the Adams family. So I want to run this report by one per household instead of one per individual, and that cuts me down to 821. And then the filter I want to use here is a terrific filter, my favorite filter, do you have a favorite filter? Is has transactions. And what I want then to do is I want to say, I want people who have not any transactions, but have at most one transaction. And I want that to be, one, they have at most one transaction. 320 one-time donors. Favorite filter has solicitor. Thanks, Emmanuel. And we want not only, we want for them to have at most one transaction, and we want them to have transactions. Any transactions will work here, but where the date range is, and again, I'm just going to keep using for today's purposes, I'm going to just keep using that during the previous 60 days. So here's a list of my 9 new first-time donors. Let's add a couple columns now. Let's add a column for has transactions. I don't want to see the number of transactions. I want to see, well, the sum, since it's going to be 1. They've only got 1 transaction, so the sum is going to be the amount of whatever that gift was. So here are my first-time donors. Their gifts were anywhere from 250, 75, 20. Now I'm going to add another column here for what we were mentioning earlier, is that generosity score that refers to Donorsearch, whether you're paying for Donorsearch or not. Now, the problem in my database is I've got my database full of imaginary people. And Donorsearch needs a real person with a real address, and these are all made up addresses. And so Donorsearch isn't, in my sample that I'm showing here, isn't giving you any results. We're not finding anybody. But you're going to want to add this column when you run this report so you can see which of the folks are hot, on fire, or even warm, or as I'll demonstrate in a second, are cool. So that's, we can save this, save and keep editing, give this a name. I'm going to put a # in front of it so it stays at the top of my list. And this is new first-time donors, in May 2020. Now, the other thing I want to see, actually, now that we've saved that, let me go back to it. If you want to see something else, if you want to see who has at least one transaction and has at most 2 transactions. Here's a list of people who just now became 2-time donors. And that's a really useful list to have too, because in fact, here what you may want to do is add a column for first transaction amount and add a column for latest transaction amount. They have at least 1, at most 2. No, actually, that's not going to get it. That has all right. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole here. Well, as Emmanuel's got a question about people that cover their own credit card fee. What's that's going to end up showing up? It's going to be probably the transaction amount is going to show up as your transaction amount. So it's going to it's going to show up in Bloomerang as a $259 transaction. That's what hit their credit card, that's what they deserve to get a tax receipt for. They're just making sure by paying the credit card fee that you get the full $250, that they're absorbing the banking cost instead of you having to absorb it. It's going to show up in Bloomerang as the total amount of the transaction. I actually was going down something here that it wasn't even in my script. Let me jump back to what I really wanted to show you here, which is the final report I want to work on for today's class would be to create a new report of people who had a gift in the last 60 days, who with that gift are now demonstrating that they are upgrading. Here's somebody who's saying, wow, not only do I support you, but if you look at their giving history, you can see that they went the extra mile with this gift. To do this report, I'm actually going to recommend that you start from a template. Typically in classes, I like to build from scratch just to make sure I'm demonstrating how Bloomerang's filters work. But let me go down here and show you a template that we have. It's got some pretty complicated filters in it, and it's called downgrades. Typically, you're going to run this report to identify folks whose giving this year is not as good as last year, that you may want to make sure that you reach out to one more time before the end of the fiscal year. And if we look at the filters, what they're saying is we're looking for people where the sum of the revenue of their transactions this year is less than the sum of the revenue of their transactions last fiscal year. And this report, the way it is showing me 565 households whose giving so far this fiscal year is not as good as it was last fiscal year. In fact, there's some pretty significant decreases. I'm not happy with that at all, but of course this is all fake data. But that's the template, downgrades. With one click, you can flip this on its head and say, we want to see the sum of the revenue amount of transactions this year is, click, greater than the sum of the revenue amount of transactions. So here's a list of 114 households that have given more this year than they gave last year. That's everybody whose gift, and of course it's a transaction report, so it's in reverse chronological order, dating back to last July 1st. Lots and lots of new donors here. But yeah, let's see now, once again, focusing right now on new donors in the last 60 days. We're looking for new friends. We're looking for people that you may want to make some special. This is a good thing to know anyway. The whole report is useful, but let's add one more filter here and say we want to make sure that we're looking for only constituents who have transactions. Again, specific transactions, the date range that we're talking about here, during the previous 60 days. So here I've got a list of my 25 donors who have a gift in the last 60 days, whose latest gift has demonstrated that they're moving up. Now I've also got, so let's go ahead and do one more thing here and say a lot of these people are one-time donors. So let's once again get rid of those and say I only want to see people who have at least 2 transactions. So now I'm down to 16. Here's 16 people who now have have multiple gifts, but their most recent one is larger. They're giving for this fiscal year, if they've been giving for 2 years, has gone up from 120 to 500, from 120 to 200. Here's one from 120 to 175. Here's one, but essentially I'm looking at the folk. A lot of these people have given more than twice, but both times in this year. But this is a list of 16 people who've made a gift in the last 60 days, and you may not want you may not want to develop a strategy or make a telephone call, or mark one of these people as a major gift prospect on every one of them. But these people that went from 50 to 300 or 120 to 500 are the folks that I think you would probably want to develop a strategy for calling, or doing a couple of things that we're going to talk about in the last 10 minutes of today's session. Really quickly, let's go ahead. I mentioned again, let's add that column for generosity score. Interestingly enough, I've got a couple of people in here that have something close enough to a real address that Bloomerang, that Donorsearch thinks they found them, even though they're probably an imaginary person or a character from Boston Legal or a shortstop for the San Francisco Giants. All right. Well, at any rate, let's go ahead and save this one. We'll save this one as pound. New upgrades of 5/2020. Now, really quick, I'm not going to spend more than a couple minutes on this, but I did mention we're recommending, when you're looking at these lists and names, you're looking for people, maybe they're first-time donors or you don't know who they are, you want to know something more about them, maybe you've got a really big list and you can't really look them all up. Let's focus on what Donorsearch tells you about people. And I said, if you're not paying for Donorsearch, you can't look at the document I'm going to show you, but you're still going to get that column. Looking at my record here, this is my actual address. All of the contributions in here are all imaginary. So you've got this generosity score on the right-hand side of every donor in your database. Whether you've actually paid to be able to click this button or not. Now, if you can click this button, then you're going to see, and you'll see there, I am cool based on my real life giving history. What this shows you is that I have a giving history of giving primarily to arts and culture, education, and food and agriculture, nutrition, and that's accurate. And they're suggesting that I could be asked for a gift of over $1,000 based on the fact that they know that I have given that much before. And that's essentially what, so hot, on fire, hot, cold, warm and cool correspond to, so a on fire is somebody who's given $5,000 at a single pop and has some other things. Hot is somebody that has markers of wealth, whether or not they can find a giving history for them. Warm is smaller markers of wealth. Cool is somebody that has a history of charitable giving, whether they're markers of wealth or not. I used to have a really high number here because I had a house that I lived in for 30 years. They had equity in it, sold that. They've not got my new downsized home in here yet, so they really don't see my wealth. But they do know that by clicking, what they've done here is Donorsearch just pours through published annual reports, and they found that I have a history of giving gifts of $1,000 or more because I show up in these annual reports of these organizations with gifts 250, 100, 100, 100. So yeah, so and I'm cool. My category, according to Donorsearch, is cool. They don't have record of great wealth, but they do have record that I do give at least 500. My gifts are, have been even more than that. The blue and red Dars? Not even. I'm going to have to get back to Larissa on that question. I'm not. I don't. Not sure I'm seeing what what the question is, but it's kind of off off what we need to hope to stay on track with. Anyway, that's what generosity score means. Even if you're not paying for Donorsearch, you can still add a column and find out that somebody is cool, which means there's a record that they give $500 at a time to other charities, and anything warm, hot, or on fire is even better. And so if you're running these reports, you're trying to identify among your 50 new donors and your 50 upgrades. You can't maybe reach out to 100 of them, but let's identify the folks that we do want to maybe dig into a little bit more, or if nothing else, just make sure they get a phone call. That's what that generosity score is telling you, even if you're not paying for Donorsearch. So now let's just go back to those first-time donors, and let's talk about what we do while they're still new. If you've been taking Bloomerang classes for a while, you know we beat on this all the time. 25% of first-time donors ever give again. Get a second gift out of them, and then the chance that they're going to be a recurring donor after that jump up to 60% or more. But what do we it's one thing to know that. What are the actual tools that help you make sure that you're doing something about it, and doing something about it while they're new donors, and not just because because you're going to run a report and find out that they're a one-time donor, but that gift was 2 years ago. Well, it's kind of late now to start treating them special. But what you can do, if we were to go, let's just go back to my dashboard. So one of the tools that I recommend is here's a brand new tool. Upper right-hand corner. This just launched within the last few weeks. Donorsearch is on the right-hand side of it. There is a fee. It's equivalent to 15% of whatever you're paying for now. So just like Bloomerang, it's based on how many records you have. The more records you have, the more people you can look up, the more it's going to cost you. It's going to add 15% to your bill. And we'll follow up with you, Nancy, if you want, if you're interested in talking to somebody about how to go about that. So first-time donor calls is a new feature. We're going to put in the upper right-hand corner of your dashboard where we bumped tasks down, and we've replaced it with a list of anybody who's made a first-time donor, assuming they got a telephone number. And you can simply click on their name, find out, you can either go straight to their record and enter a call, or you can assign a task to somebody. Now obviously they have to have a telephone number for this to do any good, but this one does. And so by clicking on it, you can make a real quick note. Called by Ron on 5/12. Left a message. That's what's going to happen most of the time. Doesn't take long to plow through these because most people screen their calls. But you save it, and now you've got not only the donation on that person's record, but the fact that they got a phone call. The other thing that we like to recommend is that another thing that we like to recommend is that you create a separate basic acknowledgement letter for first-time donors. So I'll take a look here. Heather's got a question. Can you assign a new donor phone call task to a board member that doesn't have a Bloomerang account? Well, no. You can not in Bloomerang. So if they don't have a Bloomerang account, the ability to assign them a task isn't going to. It's a good idea. And you may want to create a list of people that are being assigned to board members, but Bloomerang is not going to be able to is not going to be able to record that for you. Let's take a look at my basic acknowledgement letter, which, simple template here. The inside address, the formal name, the amount of the gift. You write this on, and essentially what we tell people is, the best way to do this is, with no filters, this letter would go and find every transaction in my database and generate a thank you for all 2,690 transactions. Well, I don't want that. What I want is to filter this for only transactions, and in fact, only transactions where the type is donation, because I really don't want to be sending a thank you for a pledge payment that fails to say thank you for your payment of $100 on your pledge of $500. I would confuse the donor. So I'm really only looking for outright donations. And I'm looking for gifts that have not been acknowledged yet. And I'm looking for a date range. So I'm looking for everything I've done since the last time I did letters. Maybe I don't remember when the last time I did letters was. So in this case, maybe what I say is, it'd be great to do, nobody gets around to thank you letters every day. Maybe you get around to it once a week, maybe you get around to it twice a week, maybe sometimes it's 3, but sometimes 10 days go by. Something you may want to do is just say date is during, actually, what I do is I just do this month. Because even if it's the 27th of the month, I'm getting everybody since the last time I did letters. I'm not, if it's been 12 days, I don't have to go back and figure out, did I do them on the 15th or was it the 14th? Or was it, it's just going to get people who have not been acknowledged yet this month. And so that's your basic acknowledgement letter. Save that. And that's what you will send for most donors that are repeat donors. Then we're going to make a copy of that letter, and we're going to add one more filter. And that filter is going to be constituent. Transaction belongs to a constituent. That is in a constituent report. We want this, and that constituent report that we just worked on was called Pound First-Time Donors? New donors, new first-time donors, May 2020. So now this is the letter that would go only to those first-time donors. I run this, and then I change the letter. Make sure I'm putting some language in here that says, thank you for becoming a member of our family of supporters. You may even want to put a paragraph in here about, what to expect. As a new donor, you'll receive quarterly newsletters and invitations to special events. Whatever else you want them to know, so they've got an expectation of how you're going to be communicating with them. And now we would save this. Would generate this letter, and so you get around to doing your thank you letters once a week, twice a week, however often you're doing it. Do your new donor letter first, and that's going to flip all of those gifts. Should have renamed it there. Let's go to details and rename this. If I went ahead and sent this letter now, it's going to tell me this found 8 letters. If I go ahead and run it, I create the letters. By virtue of creating those letters, I can now download them as a PDF, send them to the printer. I also can now go back to Tori, for example, and we will see. His gift came in on 5/5. His phone call came in. I made a phone call, and he got his letter. And his letter was a first-time donor letter. Now, if I go back and run the rest of my thank you letters, the people who were first-time donors aren't going to get that letter because I ran their letters first. Running that letter, as you'll notice here, if I go back to his $250 donation, you'll see now on the right-hand side of the page, his acknowledgement has been flipped from no to yes, so he won't get this letter now. Another thing I'll talk about, I can't spend a lot of time on it. It's kind of high-end stuff, and I'm not sure. This is something you want to give some thought to. But about a year ago, we launched a survey tool. If you go to emails and look at engagement surveys, you'll see that you've got the option to turn on 3 different outgoing emails that go to new donors 15 days after their gift is entered. You can edit the language in here a little bit, but what it's doing is it's going to send them to a SurveyMonkey survey that's going to ask them, for new donors, it's going to ask them their impression of your organization's reputation. It's also going to ask them if they felt like they were welcomed or not. So you probably don't want to turn this on if you're not doing a good job of thanking people. But if you are getting a thank you letter out to everybody and maybe a phone call for new donors too, then you're getting some good feedback from them, and it's one more touch that's not a solicitation. Now, there's also versions of this for existing donors that go out after 6 months after their last gift, but no more than twice a year. So if they're giving every month, they're not going to get one every month. They're only going to get one. They're going to get one 6 months after they become a first-time donor, and then not another one until 6 months after their next gift after that. And lapsed donor survey that is set up when somebody has just gone to more than a year since their last gift. It's going to email them automatically different questions. Frankly, you don't like to hear that a lapsed donor lapsed because they didn't feel like you communicated with them properly, but it's better to know it than to not know it and have them go away. So that's just another tool in your toolbox. I also like the idea, in some cases, of a welcome packet that you might want to create a letter that you send out to somebody who's become a new donor, or maybe a month after their gift, that includes a back issue of a newsletter. Or, if you're a community organization or a arts organization, or like a community center or an arts organization or a museum, maybe send them 2 guest passes so they can bring a friend. And send something out to them like a month after their gift. Hopefully then, if you are in fact doing some sort of quarterly newsletter or e-newsletter, sometime between a month and 3 months after they become a donor, they're going to get that normally. And so if you've done 3 or 4 of those things we just talked about, then you're probably done a pretty good job of letting this person know, this new donor know, that you know they're a new donor. You're putting some thought into your communication with them, and maybe after 4 months, it's time to send a letter that would thank them for having become a supporter several months ago, a few months ago, and would you please consider another gift at this time. You even may want to put a specific ask in there, and don't make it too high. Your goal here is not necessarily to get the biggest possible return on this particular stamp or email. You can do this by email, but it's to make sure that person makes that critical leap from never given before to first-time donor, and then from first-time donor to repeat donor, because that's when the chances that they're going to give again and again and again jump up to like 60%. Okay, so that's first-time donors. Let's spend our last 10 minutes together today talking about that report that we looked at, where we're looking at new repeat donors, new donors who have just recently upgraded. So if I go back to that report, there's my new upgrades. Here's my 16 people who've recently made a larger gift. We talked about how you might want to, we got some people in here, obviously in my situation here, got some imaginary people that are not scanned. Businesses don't show up in Donorsearch at all. Cold, you wouldn't bother with, but maybe these people who are cool are worth a phone call. Again, just to say, hey, we noticed that your last gift was a significant upgrade over your previous gift. Wanted to say thanks. You're probably going to leave a message. If you get a hold of them, it's a great chance to find something out about them. Keep it. It doesn't take a lot of time. But then then you would want to enter that as an interaction on their timeline, particularly if you learn something about it. If you find out by calling Tom Rodriguez that it's his, that he's heading out the door to take his wife out for their anniversary. Well, now you maybe got his wife's name, you got an anniversary, got some things to put on their, into their record. So I wanted to make a couple points here about things that I normally talk about at this time that are not Bloomerang functions per se, other than when you do them, you want to make sure that you're entering interactions on the person's timeline by going to their timeline and going up. And the same place you would go to enter a donation, you can also enter a new interaction. What are some of the things that you can do that are necessarily cost a whole lot more money to start taking these people that are $100 donors that have given you some indication that they might become $500 donors, and to and to cultivate them without going to the step of maybe you've got a plan. I never ask somebody for $1,000 without at least offering to buy them lunch or breakfast or dinner. Sometimes they'd say no. Frequently, particularly they'd given $1,000 before, and it was my annual check-in with them. And I said, I was wondering if I get on your lunch schedule. And they'd say, Ron, just send me a statement. I don't need to spend your money. But you don't want to necessarily spend money on every $250 donor that you're trying to get to be a $500 donor. But some of the things you could do, some basic recommendations. This isn't Bloomerang stuff. This is just sort of fundraising 301. Back when things get back to normal, hopefully you're a member of the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club or the Chamber of Commerce. Or if you've got part of a staff of 2 or 3 people, you should all be a part of a different group. And that, and just find a way to find, those people who are in your database as upgraded donors, find a way to sit at their table and have a little conversation with them. And don't feel don't hesitate to use your brief conversation with them, not to ask them for money, but just find out some more information about them. Find out where their kids go to school, things like that. Another thing I think is a really good idea is to find something that you like doing yourself and put it in your budget, or get a board member to help you. Buy season tickets to, maybe if you got a minor league baseball team, and if you're a sports fan and you're on a minor league team, season tickets to a minor league baseball, or even blocks, even not even season tickets to all 72 games that a minor league team plays, but just blocks of tickets. Get 4 tickets and take your spouse or a friend and another person a few times a year to the opera, or the community theater, or the or the minor league baseball team, and then enter the fact that you did that into their timeline in Bloomerang. And even if it's not in, sometimes it's not necessarily in your budget to buy a whole bunch of season tickets, but you can get a couple of board members who will give you an in-kind donation of 10 games, or every third performance of the ballet. They will give you those tickets for your use for that purpose, and get a tax, get an in-kind donation and a tax deduction for it. And of course, I also like the idea of using your own programs when appropriate as opportunities to add the idea of a private reception or a cocktail party to the existing program. So if you're the type of organization that has guest speakers come in, try to make sure that the guest speaker is willing to give you an extra 2 hours before or after their speech to have a little cocktail party in a private room at your location or at a board member's home. And that's something that you can invite some of these folks that are, there's somebody who's just gone from a $100 donor to a $250 donor, and you'd like to bump them up one more time. How can here's a way to invite 75 of those folks, only 30 of whom can come, to something that you got a board member to pop for a few bottles of wine for. So those are some ideas, not Bloomerang ideas, other than make sure that when you do them, you're adding the interaction to the timeline. Last thing I want to talk about, I do have an idea for a burst of revenue that I would, I'm assuming in this case, this is going to not make as much sense to you right now if you're not coming to the end of your fiscal year. But about 70% of Bloomerang customers have a June 30th fiscal year. And if you have a June 30th fiscal year, you very well may do your annual report in August or September. Whether or not it's a big glossy annual report, it's sometimes it's just, and I did this for years and years, I just did a 4-page insert in the middle of my quarterly newsletter with a couple of pie charts and a little narrative and alphabetical lists of my donors in each category. So if you're doing something like that, and you've got a policy of, whether or not they're kind of formal giving circles with names where you've got a bronze and a silver and a gold circle, or you've got, named after, a president's club and a director's club, or whether or not you've got formal things or like that, if you've got the buy-in of your staff, your development committee, to list your annual donors in gift ranges. $1,000 and up, $500 to $999, $100 to $499. Something you may want to do would be to create a report. A new report. I'm going to identify folks that are within shouting distance of that next level. So I'm going to create a constituent report. I'm going back to households. I'm looking for constituents who have transactions, have the calculated sum of the revenue amount. Revenue amount means we're looking at donations, recurring donation payments, pledge payments. We're not looking at pledges themselves, which might be multi-year pledges. So we're looking for the revenue amount of specific transactions where the date is during this fiscal year. This is assuming you've got a July 1st to June 30th fiscal year. So what this is going to do is give us people who have, it's going to give us people who have gifts this fiscal year totaling somewhere between, maybe let's go with like 110 and 249. We hit that. Here's our list of the 9 people that meet those criteria. That's the name of the people. Now we add that same logic to a column. Has transactions. Not the number, but the sum of the revenue amount of specific transactions where the date is during this fiscal year. And now, so we've got that logic to build a filter, and we've got that logic to build a column. And sure enough, every number in here is somebody who's 125 to 40. So here to be, you could use this report to generate a letter that says, thank you for your generous support this year. As you may know, we're coming up at the end of our fiscal year, and your giving so far this year is this amount. Would like, please consider another gift by June 30th so you can join the, we can be listed, you can be listed among our $250 and up donors in our annual report. It's an idea. Some people don't like doing it, but if you like the idea, this is a good time to do it. You can set it up. You can export this report to Excel, add a column where you subtract this column from 250 to get a new column that is the amount they would have to give to get there, and turn around and import that back into Bloomerang as a custom field called ask amount. And then the letter could say, please consider a gift of $75. The problem is, I'm not sure you necessarily want to do that, because with this particular donor, you're going to go, if you ask for $10, you're going to get $10. So maybe your letter just says, thank you for your gifts this fiscal year totaling this amount. Please consider an additional gift at this time. Would love to be able to demonstrate the depth of our support by showing your name in our in our silver giving circle in our annual report. And in that case, this person, instead of giving you $10, well, I'll go ahead and give 50. This person's probably going to give you 75. This person's probably going to give you 100. But if you ask for, the exact difference between 250 and this number, that's probably what you're going to get. Okay, that is the final thing I wanted to show you today. Hopefully that's something at least to play with, and maybe some folks will get some good responses out of doing it. With that, I'm going to sign out. Thank you very much for being with us today, and good luck with everything. We're all fighting the good fight.